If you're an aspiring writer, journalist, or author, podcasting could be the secret ingredient to expanding your reach, building your authority, and connecting with your audience. In this episode, I am speaking with my client, Estelle Erasmus, the host of the Freelance Writing Direct podcast, all about how she uses her podcast to help grow her writing career. We talk all about the evolution of the publishing industry and why Estelle decided to get into podcasting in the first place, how podcasting is a powerful tool for writers and authors. And we also talk about how Estelle switched from audio-only podcasting to video and what results she saw from that. If you want to use your podcast to grow your brand, this is exactly what Estelle does, and you can really learn a lot from this episode. So let's get right into this episode with Estelle Erasmus. Welcome to the Podcast Cafe, where we're serving up everything you need to know about podcasting, from tips, stories, and strategies for podcasters from podcasters. I'm your host, Haley Hayhurst, the founder of Espresso Podcast Production, a full-service podcast agency helping business owners, creatives, and thought leaders launch and grow their shows. Whether you're just starting out or want to take your podcast to the next level, this is the place for you. Each week, we'll dive into practical tips, actionable strategies, and of course, stories from other podcasters so that you can build up a podcast that you love and that works for your business. So grab your coffee, get comfortable, and let's get started. Welcome to the Podcast Cafe. Hey, Estelle, I'm really excited to be interviewing you today.
Hi, Haley. It's so great to be here, and you're such a fantastic producer, so I'm so happy to be here supporting you with your wonderful new venture.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so welcome to the Podcast Cafe. I have a really important first question for you.
Okay.
What is your go-to coffee order?
Oh, okay. That's very easy. I hope I say it correctly. It's a shaken brown sugar, I think
espresso.
Yeah, with oat.
I love that. That's also my favorite. That's so funny. That's also what I always get from Starbucks.
That is so funny. Yeah.
It's a good one. It's a good one.
It. Oh my God, I love it. I was actually traveling somewhere with my husband and I was like bored. I was always getting just like an Americano or something like that. And these two teenage girls, and I have a teenager, were in front of me and they were ordering it. And I said, that sounds really good. And they were like raving to each other about it's so calories, it's so good. And so then I fell in love with it. And now my husband does it also.
That's so funny. No, it's a classic. I love that. Well, I'm really excited to be talking all about Freelance Writing Direct with you today. So why don't you start off by telling us more about your podcast and, why you started it?
Sure. Well, Freelance Writing Direct is really distilling my 30 years of experience as somebody in the publishing space from both sides of the publishing wall, as an assigning magazine editor, former magazine editor-in-chief, and as somebody who is a very widely published journalist and essayist myself. And my book, Writing That Gets Noticed, which came out in 2023, and has won a Zibby Award and was named by Poets and Writers as the best book for writers, and also became a course at NYU and the material for courses that are taught not only by me, but by other writing teachers all over the country, which is just so fulfilling to me. And so the reason that I started Freelance Writing Direct is I knew that I was going to launch my book in June 2023. And I wanted to have my own forum, my own platform that was not dependent on somebody else, where I could have my placard in the back, mention it. Maybe guests would get the book and talk about it, which that's happened quite a few times without me even sending it to them. And so that was really one of the reasons. The other reason was I feel like people had seen me on webinars, but a lot of my courses that I was teaching at the time was online and they didn't get to see my face.
Mm-hmm.
And I am a teacher that teaches in a very, I guess, like a very specific way that's kind of driven by how I look, how I act. And I feel that that enhances what I do. Now, I wanted to do video at first, but I had a co-host who didn't. And then when I took on myself as the host in April of 2023, my co-host just wasn't able to do it anymore. It worked out because then I switched to video and I felt like that was a great forum for me as well.
Yeah, I think the switch to video was such a great move. And honestly, that's what most podcasters are doing now, starting video podcasts. I mean, what difference have you seen other than just people being able to, see your mannerisms and like connect with? I think that like it's hard to connect with someone on audio only, but we want to see people's faces, right?
Like I'm somebody that I've been in the publishing world for a really long time, but I'm also somebody that like you can talk to as a friend.
Hmm.
And I have a teenage daughter and I have a lot of things in common with my audience and my students. I'm a mom, I'm somebody who has gone through a lot of the same things. And I
Yeah.
think I can convey that better. And I've had people walk up to me because I do speak at different conferences and they come up and they say, I feel like I know you because I see you every week in my home. And, they feel connected to me. And I like that. I feel, oh, that's so sweet. Like I'm still very grateful for, the attention and the way that people are responding. And the other thing is I'm a born teacher. I mean, I taught back in the early aughts at NYU, and then I had kind of a hiatus to have my daughter and make a lot of career transitions. And I went back to teaching for Writer's Digest in 2016, NYU in 2019. And I've since won the Teaching Excellence Award from NYU. And I just love being able to share what I've learned. And I think that makes me an unusual teacher because not because most teachers don't like to share what they learn, but I'm
Hmm.
continually learning. I'm
Yeah.
continually attending other people's sessions or webinars or taking courses myself to just expand on my knowledge. And then I bring that in the terms of connections or in the terms of knowing what's really important to my students. And so I feel like I'm not someone there are a lot of writing teachers who just won't even look at what somebody else is doing because they feel, and I feel that solidifies you, that gets you
Hmm.
very stuck in a pattern. And I'm always a grower. I think one of the things that my students like about me, and maybe the podcast people too, is that I'm a perennial student of life and I have a growth mindset. And that's enabled me to pivot with the twists and turns of the industry. I mean, you have to
Yeah.
remember, I started in the 90s. I remember when it was a big deal to write about online things because people were like,
Hmm.
oh my God, you can decorate your house online. And I was the editor in chief of a magazine called Wit, Women in Touch. And I said, we're going to get someone who's an expert. I wasn't an expert, but we're going to get someone, her name's Kim Commando. She's still working in the computer and online space. And I said, and she's going to put together like a day using online, using the internet to decorate her house, to find information. And it was the biggest, most controversial thing. Like people couldn't believe, they're like, wow, you're doing this. Nobody knows how to do this. And, so I went through that. And then I went through where, the big VC funding of all the online publications, and I started writing for them. And back in the day, they would pay you $1 a word in the beginning. They
Oh
had
my
that
gosh.
money. It was
Yeah.
crazy. Whereas for print, it's really kind of stopped. I think the highest you can go for the most part for most publications is like $2. Usually it's $1 for print. Online way less. I mean, online
Mm-hmm.
completely changed once it started getting saturated. But I had places commissioning me like music.com to write a huge number of pieces, and then they would, put them out accordingly. Thank God for the Wayback Machine where I still can have access to it. There was some big investor, I can't remember his name. I wish I could remember his name. He was very involved with health stuff, and he commissioned me to do a whole bunch of stuff for his website. Now it's very different. Now they have verticals and they have different people in charge. Now they're firing editors because AI is kind of helping with that. And so the editors have a lot more on their plate, and they're changing how things are done. But I went through that. And then I went through, I see print just going away unless it's a niche publication. I'm a contributing editor for Writer's Digest, which the magazine, which again, it's a niche publication. It's for writers of all ilks. But the general ones, the ones I grew up with that were print publications, they're long gone. And the new hot thing is Substack, but that's changing too.
It is. I know it's all changing so fast, but I love how you kind of, you stayed on top of it throughout, the decades you've been working. And ultimately, podcasting is just another stepping stone to like a new platform, right? So I actually went to school for journalism. I don't know if you know that, but I went to journalism at UNLV in Las Vegas, and I wanted to be a writer, but found my way to podcasting somehow. So I feel like I'm still using my degree in a lot of ways, but it's not what I ever imagined it would be, but it's like so much better. I love working on like the audio side of things, the video side of things, and just staying on top of it as it transitions.
And that makes a lot of sense to me that you have this background in journalism, because you have an understanding of the material. And even in terms of like, when you first do your first pass at the show notes, I could see that you listen and you take it in, and, you have an understanding.
Yeah, definitely. No, I loved going to school for journalism. I'm so glad that I did it. So, it is. Interviewing, talking, writing, these are all skills that I think everyone should work on. And those are skills that people can learn by listening to your podcasts too. So throughout your decades of working, like you've had all these connections. And one thing I love about your show is you're interviewing a lot of people that you already know or you have connections with, or you're having your connections connect you with other people. So there's a lot of podcasts that will interview guests that they don't really know, which, that's okay. But I love that you're tapping into your network. Can you tell us more about that?
It's so interesting because I've been in the business of publishing for 30 years. I touch on so many places. I touch on organizations that I've been involved in, Women's Media Group, Women in Communications, ASJA, which I ran a conference, and back in the day I was the publications chair, and I did a show for them. So like I've done, and then, the Irma Bombeck Writers Conference, there are just so many places that I've spoken to and with over the years. And then editors who I've met in the course of me working with them, or students working with them, where I do the Editor on Call series for NYU, where I have guest editors come and speak. And so that is something that I keep abreast of. And the other thing is, I know people, they always say like your success depends on the openness of your network. So my network is not just writers. I have a lot of people in my network who are business people, who are entrepreneurs, who are owners, and that some of that comes through. Then again, there are people that my agent introduces me to, people that my publisher introduces me to. So launching a book was a whole nother way of expanding into my network. I have somebody who's going to be a guest on the podcast that she asked me to write a blurb for her, and she's with my publisher, and I just adore her. And I wrote a blurb, and she's a guest that's going to be coming up soon on the podcast, Becca Powers. Awesome. She wrote A Return to Radiance. So I'm excited about that. And so, yes, my network is big, and I have not really had to look outside of my network for guests, because I have so many people between students who are now doing really well and publishing widely, between people that I've helped promote, and I started doing coaching episodes, as you
Mm-hmm.
know, and
Mm-hmm.
now I have a list of people who want to be on my coaching episodes, and I kind of just keep it as an open thing, and that's a way to work with me, in a way, a precursor to working with me. So I don't really have students for my private Zoom classes that I haven't worked with before. So if you want to
Yeah.
work with me in the very intense, very small private Zoom classes that are just so fantastic, you need to have taken one of my classes, and sometimes a webinar. Like if somebody writes to me afterwards, I'll have
Yeah.
to do it. And I'm sold out right now.
I love that. I mean, you're doing so much for the writing community, so it only makes sense that you've had so much success in your own podcast, right? People want to come and support you and listen to you and learn from you. I mean, if you're having these sold out classes, absolutely having this free resource of a podcast
Yeah.
impacts that, right? Like people want to hear from you and learn from you. And so what have you seen in terms of maybe your book launch or these classes launching? Are there a lot of people who have listened to the podcast first and then come and work with you, or are they working with you, like they learn about you and then go learn about the podcast more?
Well, people can work with me through my Writer's Digest
Mm-hmm.
course or my NYU course before they work with me in my private classes.
Right.
But I feel like people come to me for a wide variety of reasons. Like some people say, oh, I saw a piece you wrote for Writer's Digest where you're a contributing editor. Some people will say somebody recommended you. Like I have a lot of
Mm-hmm.
recommendations. My friend told me how great you were with working with them, and I would love to work with you. So, and the book is just not in the heavy promo part of the book anymore because
Right.
it's been out since June and I'm focused on my next project, was memoir and novel. And so, but it's still like, I'm so proud of it. I loved doing it. I loved that I was able to highlight my students in the book, their work, and also take some colleagues' work and analyze it, like Bill Dameron, who wrote A Modern Love, which I analyze in the book. And so I feel like this is just now a part of me now. My
Mm-hmm.
book is a
Mm-hmm.
part of me. It's a part of my teaching. It's until I have another book out, it's going to be the placard, right? So I'll keep
Yeah.
it as the placard. It's still in my intro because it's something that I'm proud of, and it's gotten a number of accolades, and I'm just very happy with it. I would love more Amazon reviews. That's always good.
Yes.
But and my Substack is called Estelle Erasmus Writing That Gets Noticed, so it kind of ties in with the branding of it.
Yeah.
But I'm somebody who is kind of always on to the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I love my book so much, but I'm definitely like looking forward, looking to
Yeah.
my next. And that's why I'm working on memoir, I'm working on novel. I've had a lot of novelists on my podcasts, like the
Yes.
wonderful Caroline Levitt, Days of Wonder, Anne Hood, who's both a memoirist and a novelist, Joanna Rakoff, who's a memoirist, just so many people. I mean, Christy Tate, who's a memoirist for group. And I find that I learn as much as my
For
listeners
sure.
do.
Definitely. Yeah.
And so, again, listening to my own podcast, I take what I'm learning and I bring it to my students. If they
It's
haven't heard the
amazing.
podcast, I encourage them and I use it as part of my work. I say,
Mm-hmm.
like, we're working on timelines this week. Here are 5 episodes that covered timelines. Let's do that. If I'm doing something on pitching, here are my pitching episodes. So I can tie in to what is necessary. And I think that's important for people who want to start a podcast and work with you to know that they can extrapolate what they need from their podcast episodes and make it work in a very synthesizing way with everything else that they're doing. And I think that's really helpful. And I even say that to people. And also, I keep abreast of what's happening in the podcast community, right? That's how I learned about listen notes, and that's where I'm now in the top 3% of
Yes.
podcasts.
Congrats.
Yay! Yeah, it went from 5% to 3%, so that's good.
Yeah.
And, where I learned, for example, that you should number your podcasts, and then we had talked about that, and now they're numbered. I went back, they're all numbered now. And so I can say, refer to episode 123,
Yes.
and I don't have to put the full title in. If I'm saying, like, we're talking about through lines, and you can find it in episode 123, which you can.
Yeah.
Yes. And, I do other things. Like, first of all, I know that there are people who just rely on publicity people to send them stuff. And I have publicity people sending me stuff up the wazoo. But I like to have some sort of personal connection. It doesn't mean I have to know the author, but if I admire their work, if I've seen them in some capacity, if I've been on a panel with them, or a friend of mine has been on a panel, that's a great in. Now, of course, if somebody, the bigger the author, the less they're likely to email me and say, hey, I love your podcast. But You never know. You just never know. There are just I feel like I have a connection with so many people. There's so many things that I've done in my career and touched on, from speaking to being in Listen to Your Mother to, there's just so many connections that I make with people. And AWP, I was a mentor. I met other mentors in the program. So and then the AWP asked me to do a video. So it's just kind of exciting, and I love it. And I have to really make sure that I'm putting my energy in the right place. And this year I decided I'm only going to do things that bring me joy.
I love that.
That includes teaching the podcast, my own personal writing, obviously working with the students that I'm working with. And, that's pitching only the real, like, creme de la creme that I want to be. That has a really big, wide readership, and that's going to be headed towards my next focus, which is going to be memoir.
I love that. I definitely wanted to touch on your network, because I think that's a spot where a lot of podcasters don't tap into, believe it or not. Like, a lot of podcasters are like, who am I going to interview? Like, I don't have anyone to interview. And I always think there's someone in your network or someone who knows someone that you can interview. So I definitely love you sharing all of that, because that is a place that I think a lot of podcasters can improve on.
This is important to me. I don't always go for, like, the hot new thing that just came out. Like, it's okay. Hannah Sward was on my program, and her book came out 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But she's a fantastic literary citizen, and, like, we came to each other's attention, and I thought she'd be great. And she really has been great. She had a great episode, and we talked about things that I feel she hadn't talked about before, like, her father's poetry and using that to excavate memory and so much else. So, and she was very happy with the episode. So, things like that make a difference. I am now inundated, though, I have to tell you, PR people have found me. And so I'm constantly balancing, what I think is a good mix for the audience, for myself, for what I want to do next.
Yeah, I have been inundated with PR people as well. So I think when you start a podcast and it starts having, like, eyes on it and listens, then the PR people come, and you really do have to just sift through who you want to interview and who you don't. But it's a good problem to have, too many people to interview, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. And that episode with Hannah Sward was amazing. For all the listeners, I'll put it in the show notes. Her story is she
wrote the memoir strip.
Yeah. It's an amazing story.
Amazing.
Yeah. So thank you so much for touching on, like, the networking part of it and the network part. I also see a lot of podcasters struggle with this other spot that you don't struggle with, and it's talking about your podcast and, promoting it. There's so many times where someone comes to me and they're like, how do I get more listeners? And I say, okay, where are you posting about it? Who are you telling about it? Who are you promoting it? And they're like, on Apple Podcast. And I'm like, no, you have to you have to talk about it. And that's something that you do really well. So can you share some tips that have gotten you to the success that you have?
Sure. I feel like I have a love-hate relationship with social media, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like, I On the weekends, most weekends I'm not posting unless I'm like waking up earlier than everyone on like Saturday and I'm like, oh, nobody's around. I'll just, my daughter's sleeping, my husband's, he's gone to the gym or something, and I'll just like do some posting. But I usually won't. I usually try to stay off social media on the weekends. So people say to me, it's so funny. People say, I see you everywhere. And I think, that is so bizarre. I've never hired anyone to help with social media. Never. I do it all myself. I don't post in advance or do a pre-post. I never did Hootsuite or any of that stuff. I post when I want to. Honestly, I'm behind. Like, I had a fantastic episode with Christy Tate, who wrote Group, just came out, about through lines and timelines and imagery. And it's so fantastic. I love the episode. It came out in my newsletter yesterday. My newsletter goes out every Thursday. Usually at 9, but sometimes, life interferes and it's later, or maybe on a Friday, but usually on a Thursday. But then I like to do a post on Facebook, and I have a Facebook personal page, which is very locked down. I mean, people are trying to friend me, but if I don't have any connection to them, I really don't accept Facebook friends. Why? I have a 15-year-old daughter and I just don't, especially men, I don't have them on my page unless I know them in some way. And then I have a professional page, which is Estelle.Erasmus on Facebook, and that I accept more people, and so that I put on. Then I do Instagram, and the other thing I do is now, and I'm behind the times, I have to do, I think Hannah was the last one I did, I have to do Christie's, but I then use people as like, there's the part where you can post and then you can have them as a collaborator. And so that's something. Some of them accept, some of them don't, some don't even know what it is. And I try to do that. And then the other thing I do is I have a Substack, which I post maybe like once a month, but I also give options for my paid subscribers to have an opportunity to have like a micro memoir edited by me, and several of them have gone published. Several of my students have gotten published in the New York Times, Tiny Love Story, but I've had other people get published in other different places. So they're getting my free editing services. Obviously, if I have thousands and thousands of paid subscribers, I can't offer that, but I don't. So right now I can offer it. Sometimes I'll review a pitch. Sometimes I'll review the beginning of an essay. So I offer kind of that, and I offer bonus clips from the podcast. And so far, so good. I mean, I'm putting more and more effort into Substack, but I also see Substack wildly changing. Am I on top of notes like I should be? No. Am I on top of, I don't feel like I'm really on top of everything. Like I belong to I have Blue Sky, I have Threads. Honestly,
there's so much.
I do what I want. I'm just going to say, I do what I want when I want. And, if people are going to take the links that I am sharing and want the information, they've got it.
But you're also intentional with it, which I do love. Like, that's probably why it converts so well and you get more listeners every month, because you're not posting when you don't want to. You're posting when you do, and you're posting what you want to. So I think the intention behind it is really a good thing for listeners to hear, because a lot of them might be overwhelmed with all the posting as well, and so they're just posting random stuff, but just post.
I'm very careful about what I post. First of all, I have a very private husband. I don't really I do have my locked down Facebook page. Like I'll do some family photos and things like that, but I don't, really, I always say to people, if you want to really learn about me, read my writing. That's where I've written about my ectopic pregnancy, my hearing loss, my, inappropriate therapist when I was younger, sandwich generation caretaking, my dad who has Alzheimer's, who I sang back to, all the stuff with my daughter that I wrote for the New York Times about bully-proofing your child and bored tweens and all sort of stuff. That's really where people can understand about me. I share some of it on the podcast. Lately, I've been sharing a little bit more each time, although I'm always like, well, the show is really focused on sharing writing advice and structuring and even inspirational. But if I have something that's connected to it, I do share that. And so I feel that that's important too. Like I recently wrote for Next Avenue about a babysitter that I had when I was younger who really changed my life. She had a restless spirit. It was sort of like a cat in the hat experience. And then I parent my daughter differently since I had that babysitter.
Oh, wow.
So again, that's a way you want to learn all about me, even my little secrets. Go ahead, read my writing.
I love that. I love that. Estelle, this has been so much fun. Before we get into my rapid fire section, is there anything else you want to talk about?
I would just say that don't be afraid to start a podcast if you have the right support, and don't be afraid to do it solo. I love doing it solo. I mean, I don't have to run anything by anybody else. It's like
Mm-hmm.
my decisions. It's like my guests, you don't have to split it. I think about Stevie Nicks talking about Fleetwood Mac, and I'm not making myself akin to her in any way. I'm just using it as a reference point. And she said, when I was in Fleetwood Mac, there were 5 performers, and each of us brought music to the table, but we could only pick a certain amount of songs. And
Yeah.
that's why she ended up becoming a solo performer, because then she could use her music. And so I think that's a good correlation if you want to talk about like why to do a podcast yourself. The other thing is podcasting is so freeing in so many ways, because I'm somebody who's always changing, always growing, always changing. If I'm interested in something, I'm going to find a way to bring it onto my program in a way that's going to support and help my audience. And so, but it's also my interest. So it goes along with what I was saying about doing things that bring you joy.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I think solo podcasts are definitely like I do a solo podcast, but I never feel like I don't have content to talk about because I'm always either talking on a certain topic, like planned out topic, which is the same what you do with, your solo episodes, or you have guests. And so, yeah, I know a lot of people want a co-host, but honestly, I think don't let that hold you back. So that is really great advice.
And I want to say something. When I started doing the solo coaching episodes, and I
Mm-hmm.
think you and I talked about it, and you were like, that's so great. I was so nervous. I was thinking, oh, if I don't
Oh,
have a guest, is anyone going to want to hear what I have to say? And actually, those episodes do really, really
mm-hmm.
well and have brought more people to me who want to learn from me and take my teaching. So I feel like that's almost like an ad that I'm doing.
Yeah.
It's like you could see me almost working in live time. And yes, there's editing involved, but it's really, I'm not adding something after the fact. It's me coming up with the ideas on the spot as I'm speaking with the person that I'm coaching.
Yeah.
And I love that. I used to love when I was in a magazine editor, live TV. It was just so much fun, the ping ponging back and forth. And I feel like I give a little bit of that in those live coaching episodes.
Absolutely. You definitely do. I love those episodes too. And one other thing I wanted to ask you about is when you decided you wanted to start your podcast, obviously I helped you launch it and then I help you with the ongoing management of it. Do you want to
Yes.
share anything about outsourcing to any
Well,
podcaster?
I love working with you. I mean, you're somebody I feel like you have my back. I feel you're so responsive. I had a situation, I'm not going to specify what it was, but somebody had said something incorrectly and they were freaking out about it. And
Yes.
they, wanted it gone. And it was, okay, if it's completely incorrect, it's going to cause a big problem. It was a very rare case. And I got in touch with you, and right away you said, I'm on it. And it was just like, a breath of, relief for me. And I think that kind of support is so important. And also feeling, I mean, there are only limited hours in the day. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I have students, I teach, I'm working on my own projects, I have friends, I have a social life, I have a dog. And, there's only so much that I can do. And having that support from you and being able to work ahead of time if I'm going away, and I travel a lot for business and for speaking and for family. And so it just feels great. And you have also been somebody who's very growth oriented, as I am. And so you're always asking me, and I so appreciate this, Haley. You're like, what can I do, to help you even more, to, what are the things you want me to look for? And I have this little thing that I always say, and I say that to you. I say, oh, can you watch the And I try to watch it too. And so it's just my little key thing that I do. And so I feel like you have my back. And I think that's so important. In life, you want people, whether it's an agent, a lawyer, an accountant, to have your back. So thank you.
Oh my gosh. Well, I love working with you. Thank you so much for saying that.
My pleasure.
No. So I have a few rapid fire questions for you. My first question for you is, what is like the first podcast you listened to or first podcast that had like an impact on your life?
I have to say Zibby Owen's podcast, which was formerly named Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. And I listened to that podcast, and now it's called, I think, oh gosh, I don't remember what it's called. She just rebranded it, saying Zibby's Fully Booked. I think it's called Zibby's Fully Booked, which is so cool.
Cute. Yeah.
And I love it. And it was before I was on her podcast, and I was listening to her talk to Anna Quinlan and Caroline Levitt and just so many great people who were on her program. And once I won the Zibby Award for Best Book for the Writer, I was on her podcast as well. So that was wonderful. She's been on mine. And I just think that she was one of the first ones to really start talking to authors and interrogating them in a way that exposed like kind of psychological workings and not just the technical, which is like how I like to get deep in a way.
Yeah.
And she has a very obviously broad network, far broader than mine, but it's like, it's just amazing. She's a great podcast. And then the other one is The Shit No One Tells You About Writing. And that's Bianca Moraes with two agents, Carly, and she's fantastic. And I know her personally, and that was wonderful. And I was also invited to be on her podcast. So I loved that experience. And that made a big difference for me in terms of understanding really how like kind of a bigger operation works, because it's not just her, it's her and two agents. And they do all sorts of wonderful seminars and Substack and all that. So, and I just pay attention to that because, again, they do more than just talk about the authors. They also do queries and break that down. And so I listen to that because I do my solo episodes, and it gives me ideas of things that I could potentially cover in the future, even if I'm not covering them now. Like maybe I will get into things talking about query letters.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I love those. I'll definitely put those in the show notes for anyone to go check out as well. My next one is, what is your favorite podcast genre besides your own?
Oh, well, you know what? I like podcasts that are like pop culture-y, you know?
Because you're a Real Housewives fan, and so am I. So I love that.
Like, Call Her Daddy and things like that. I don't get to listen that often, but like those kind of fun, they have their celebrity adjacent, I call them.
Yes. Yeah.
And boy, I would love to have celebrities on my program. Like I would love that. Not just housewives. I mean, that would be okay. But I mean, like people that I've looked at, my whole life, like Julie Andrews. Julie Andrews, come on my program.
Anyone knows her.
She wrote a children's book with her daughter.
Very cool. Very cool. I love that. That was actually my next question of your dream podcast guest. So I love
Well,
that.
I have
Celebrities.
a connection. And the funny thing is, if Julie Andrews were to come on my program, and please,
Hmm.
please come, Julie, I have a connection because my grandmother was a dressmaker.
Hmm.
And in Poland, she had a whole team of people working for her. And then, of course, the Holocaust happened, and they were always one step ahead of the Nazis, and they escaped into Russia, and they ended up coming to America when my mom was 15. And my grandmother had to start over as a dressmaker, working for different companies and people and outfits. And when she progressed a little bit more as a dressmaker, my mother was still in her teen years, she ended up doing a dress for Julie Andrews. Now, she had really no connection
Wow.
with her. She didn't talk to her. They didn't have a communication, but this was definitely a claim to fame that I've heard like throughout my whole childhood. So
I love that.
I could say that.
I love that. I love that. Okay, I hope it happens. That's amazing. What a cool story. Okay, my next question is, do you have any pet peeves in podcasts as a listener?
As a listener, I think that sound quality is important. Like I
Hmm.
don't like, and I know that's something important to you too, because you're like, make sure, but sometimes you want me to send you the audio as well as the video and things like that. So it's like really clear if there's some kind of a interference. And so I always say that if the person, a lot of times people want to use ear pods to speak, and ear pods
Yeah.
have a way of moving, jiggling when
The
they're laughing,
hair rubs on
the
it. Oh my
hair,
God.
you feel rustling, and I'm like,
Yes.
and so I will say, like, somebody will often say to me, is the ear pods okay? And I'm like, you know what, I'd rather you do it like just without, if you don't have the headphones. And I
Hmm.
understand everyone, I don't like putting the headphones on my head. It's like
Yeah.
ruins my hair, flattens my
Right.
face looking, and I'm like, just do it without. It's okay.
Hmm.
If I have a good mic, I have a good system, and we test it beforehand. So
Yeah.
I think that's one thing. The other thing is, I mean, I love it when there are more notes, that I give you more notes on me than my guests. So I'm like, can you get rid of my knows? I'm going on a rant here. I'm going on I'm talking about something that's a non sequitur. Just, get rid of it. And usually you catch most of those. But if my guest is constantly, I don't know, either fumbling or,
Hmm. Hmm.
just, and that usually doesn't happen. I think maybe I can think of 3 times so far that that's happened, where the edit had to be really significant for my guest.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah.
So
No,
and
just
I
making
mean,
it clear for sure. And I have one more question for you. What is the best advice you've ever received about podcasting?
okay, I would say, and this is going to sound very kind of counterintuitive, but be yourself. Like,
Hmm.
don't be, because it's podcasting. I mean, podcasting is really radio. It's radio 2.0 with the
Hmm.
video, if you're adding the video. If you're just doing the audio, which I did when I was starting out, it's really just your personality. And I don't have a dry personality. I mean, I know that about myself. It's like kind of to your own self be true, right? So there are people that have dry personality. Some people it's worked for, right? But in general, especially when you're starting, if you are starting audio just to test the waters, you have to have a way of engaging people. And I think that this is where my background as a theater kid and as a singer comes
Hmm.
in, because I've been in shows, I've been on TV, I've been on stage. I enjoy being on stage. And so there's a performative aspect of what I'm doing, but I'm still trying to be true to myself. Does that make sense to you?
It does. It really does. And I think, yeah, our personality should come through in our podcast because that's what's going to make people remember us and also come back. So that's
Yeah.
really great advice.
And somebody said to me, I think it was Elizabeth Sist who was on my show. She said, the most interesting people are the ones who were told, oh, you're too much, or, oh,
Hmm.
this, you're such a big personality. Well, look,
Yeah,
I had that said to me my whole life, but it actually works really well for podcasting and
it
teaching
does.
and
Yeah.
teaching. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Oh my gosh, this episode has been so good. Thank you so much for joining me, Estelle. I'll put all of your links to your website, your social media, and your podcast in the show notes so people can come and connect with you. But I just really appreciate you joining me today, and it's been so fun interviewing you. I've listened to every episode you've put out on your show, but now it's so cool to be able to be on the other side of the mic.
Well, anybody who is looking to launch a podcast or switch over from doing it yourself to getting support, I have to say, without a doubt, I recommend you work with Haley Hayhurst from Espresso Podcast Productions.
Thank you so much, Estelle.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining me in the Podcast Cafe. I hope you're leaving with fresh ideas and inspiration to take your podcast to the next level. Remember, podcasting is a journey and you don't have to do it alone. I'm here to help you every step of the way. Let's connect. Be sure you follow me on Instagram at Espresso Podcast Production or visit espressopodcastproduction.com for more tips, resources, and behind-the-scenes insights. I'd love to hear about your podcasting journey. If you've enjoyed today's episode, make sure you hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you're feeling extra generous, I'd love it if you could leave me a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps more podcasters just like you find the show. Until next time, grab your coffee, keep creating, and I'll see you back here in the Podcast Cafe.